My name's Rudy Salas. I'm the Assembly Member for 32nd Assembly District. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you guys. For once, we're doing this locally. How many people are happy that they didn't have to drive an hour or 2 hours to get to LA? How about taking the whole day to get up to the Bay Area or to Sacramento, right? And for all of our out-of-towners, thank you for coming to Bakersfield. Thank you for coming to our slice of paradise down here. We're so happy to have each of you. So good afternoon, colleagues. I am humbled today by the remarkable work happening throughout the state and have enjoyed hearing many examples of the transformational work happening in the various educational sectors. The work that you do, the foundational work of setting a vision and demonstrating a proven ability to deliver results makes my job and the job of each of your representatives very easy. For example, a simple text message I sent to President Christian 2 years ago inquiring about a list of projects that needed funding. And in true President Christian fashion, right, she not only replied to my text message, but within 24 hours, she gave me an entire detailed plan about how to spend some money. So she said, hey, if you got money for us, I got exactly the place for it to go and how we can help these kids, right? And that's what today's about. It's about finding those ways we can partner together to make a difference for our community and to make a difference for our students and the future of California. Asking for funding obviously is a lot easier when we can communicate the outcomes clearly. And so I joined the conversation with our guests today through this lens. How do we come together as collective individuals to create opportunities for people in California to have better lives? Right? The goal is clear. We need high quality, accessible education and skills development designed to meet our workforce needs. We need to meet California's growing unmet, 1.1 million baccalaureate degrees and skills to move California to propel it into the next century. With that, let me go ahead and say we have a responsibility to break through the bureaucracy and to leverage policy to advance our shared vision on behalf of our students and our communities. So with that, I'd like to turn to our panelists, our keynote panelists who will join me in discussion about our policies, leaders statewide, or what they're doing so we can move in this direction. So let's go ahead and begin. Let's just go ahead and jump right into that. Let me remind the audience that as you're listening to each of our panelists today, time permitting, we will actually allow questions from the audience at the very end. So if you hear something that's very intriguing to you, please do not hesitate, do not be shy about asking a question at the very end. So with that, we're going to go ahead and begin with our Chancellor. So the first question is for you, Chancellor Oakley. I know that you have a strong commitment to the Valley. President Christian raves about you, and we heard that just before we started here just now. But, she talks about your equity and completion agenda. She refers to you as an activist chancellor and everything that you've been able to do since your tenure and things that we haven't seen done at the community colleges in the last decade or so. And so I just wanted to ask if you could just share some of your major accomplishments, perhaps talk about maybe guided pathways or visions for success. So please, let's begin with you, Chancellor.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to be President of the United States because, sorry, this is not a debate.
It is debate season.
I feel like I'm on a debate stage. But,
although we don't want our panelists debating each other too much, but working in collaboration here.
Okay. No, seriously, first of all, thank you to Bakersfield College. Thank you to the Kern Community College District for hosting us, for bringing us together. This is my second Friday in a row in the Central Valley. I was at some town called Fresno last Friday, but I'm in Bakersfield now.
Thank you for being here.
So, why I'm here, why we're here, is, I think, clear to most of you, but it's not always been clear to all of us in California, and that is, in order for California to be the golden state that we want it to be, we need to ensure that the Central Valley and the Inland Empire and the far north, regions that we have by and large left behind for several decades, we need to be in a place where they are front and center leading the way in educational opportunities, because the future of California is right here in the Central Valley. So, and the community colleges play the greatest role at serving the needs of places like Bakersfield, like Kern County, like the San Joaquin Valley, like the Inland Empire. We are community colleges. We are in this community. Bakersfield College is part of this community. There is no Bakersfield without Bakersfield College. So really digging in and utilizing the assets that we have in our now 115, soon to be 116 college system, quite frankly, we need to be in a leadership position. We need to be the leaders in educational opportunity. We have the privilege of accepting the top 100% of students. We don't have a lot of people photoshopping themselves in a crew team to get into Bakersfield College. That's a great thing. And so, you know, for me, like for many of you, it's personal. You know, I'm a first generation student. So I wouldn't be here but for the California community colleges. And so we really need to, you know, all kidding aside, is be clear and be serious about where we are with educational opportunities in communities like this. We need to be honest with ourselves. We need to begin to target resources, appropriate resources to communities like this. And we need to hold ourselves accountable to ensure that we're providing educational outcomes to everyone who comes to our colleges, not just a few who have had the opportunity to finish and go on. So, you know, for me, you know, we're very, very happy to have the support of Governor Newsom. The Board of Governors for the California Community Colleges is clear about the equity mission of the community colleges. The vision for success tries to lay out a clear roadmap for how to get there and to be clear about what we need to do. So I think from my perspective, you know, we've identified the roadmap. We need to empower communities like this, empower leaders like Sonia and her team here at Bakersfield College to do the work that's necessary, and then hopefully get out of their way so they can get it done.
All right, thank you, Chancellor. Appreciate that. One thing that you'll find, you ask for honesty, you're going to get a lot of honesty in the Valley. Is that correct? Absolutely. One thing is we like to tell it straight, and so you'll get that here, but I really appreciate the accountability piece and how we're actually going to get there. All right, let's go ahead and turn to our second panelist, and actually I'm going to start with our Senior Policy Advisor for the Governor, and that's Ms. Lande Ajose. Ajose. All right, let's all say it. Ajose. Ajose. All right, one of the things that I've loved, Lande, I'm just going to call you Lande. Is that okay? We're in the Valley. We all go by first names here.
Okay.
So Lande, one of the things that I loved about Governor Newsom is, you know, not only when he was campaigning, but even in the beginning of the year with the State of the State speech, he talked about the Central Valley. He talked about how important this region is. He talked about California, not in terms of isolated pockets, but really how do we collectively get together and how do we move forward, right? In those discussions, he talked about a coastal California, he talked about an inland California, right? And Chancellor Oakley just talked about this, talking about not only the Inland Empire and the Central Valley, but how do we start moving forward in a direction to address some of those needs? And so if you could just talk to us about what's happening in the governor's office with the administration, what are we going to do to, how do we get to this 1.1 million baccalaureate degrees that we need? And kind of what's the vision there? What are some of the thoughts that you guys are discussing there?
Great, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Assembly Member, for your leadership. Thank you to former member Jean Fuller, who I know is here in the room. And thank you to Sonia Christian for the invitation. I think it's remarkable, your leadership. Not only have you been leading this college, but you got everyone here to dress in red, white, or black, which is extraordinary. So you must have everyone's cell phone numbers. So, you know, I was really proud and feel enormously privileged to be serving in this administration. Governor Newsom has laid out a very ambitious agenda for this state that is fundamentally principled on what we are calling a California for all. And a California for all is focused on 3 elements. One is that we have a huge affordability crisis in this state, and that we have to address that head on. Secondly is that we have a huge equity crisis in this state, and we need to look at how we address that head on. And third, that our fundamental responsibility to all of you is to serve and be of service effectively. So we are thinking about cost, we are thinking about justice, and we're thinking about effective governance. And so within that frame, I've kind of taken that and said, well, what does that really mean for higher education? Well, for higher education, it means that we want to take the cost crisis and look at what is happening in terms of the total cost of attendance for students. And I say total cost of attendance because we tend to be a little myopic in higher education and talk about tuition. And actually, if you look at tuition, it's remained relatively flat for the last 7 or 8 years. But what has continued to increase is the cost of living. Right? And so when college is getting more expensive, it's not necessarily because tuition is going up. It is because it is more expensive for us to live in this state. The Student Aid Commission recently completed a study that shows students on average in this state are spending $2,000 a month on non-tuition costs.
Wow.
Not $2,000 a month, which far outstrips what a student would pay at a UC. Right? So we really need to think about what is that cost crisis and what we can do within the government to address that. Secondly is around equity. We know that we need to do a better job of making sure all regions of the state are better served. It means that is part of his focus on this region, on the Central Valley and on the San Joaquin Valley and on inland California. This is day 4 of a 4-day swing for me through inland California. I've been to state correctional facilities in Chino. I was out in Indian Wells talking about college affordability. We had our Commission on the Future of Work conference yesterday in Riverside, and I'm wrapping up today, where else but in Bakersfield. Right? And the third piece is around governance and what we can do to effectively govern our systems. And Eloy doesn't cringe so much when I say this, but some of my other colleagues do. My job or my aspiration is that we need to do a better job of blurring the lines between our educational systems. Because when you were a student, you're not thinking, oh, I want to start at and then I want to go to, you're thinking, how do I get my degree? How do I complete college? It is not about our individual systems. It is about that student making their way through and obtaining their goal. And in order for us to do that, it means our systems need to work together much more collaboratively. And that's the work that we've been doing on our Council for Post-Secondary Education. And that council, as some of you may have heard last week, the governor made an announcement that we're starting, some of the work that the council is starting to do is by piloting a K-16 intersegmental collaboration that involves all of the higher education systems. It involves 4 unified school districts in the Fresno area, 3 community colleges, Fresno State, UC Merced, and they're all coming together to think about how do we solve the capacity crisis? How do we ensure that we have better throughput of students and more efficient throughput of students? And how do we make sure that we are fundamentally meeting our goals around economic growth and around social mobility? And that has to start in the region that is the least served in our state, and that's the San Joaquin Valley. So that is some of what we are thinking about in terms of baccalaureate attainment.
Thank you. We definitely have that need here in the Central Valley. And, let me just go ahead and segue off of, you talked about the blurred lines between each of the educational systems, and this is a great segue into, Miss Lupita, Alcala. We've known each other for about 20 years. She used to be my mentor when I was just a little fellow in the Capitol. She is now the right-hand woman of our state superintendent, and now actually guiding policy that's going to have an impact on millions and millions of students across the entire state. And I say not just the state, but really across the country, because a lot of what we do here in California actually has ripple effects across the entire country. And so when we're talking about these blurred lines and how are we getting these, each of the different segments and getting students to get to that career, to get to what we're deeming a successful individual, How do you see that playing into what the superintendent's policies and visions are? You know, here in Kern County, we've been focusing a lot on early college, and Dr. Christian has done a lot of work with our local colleges where ninth graders now are dual enrolled in our community colleges. So then when they graduate their senior year here in high school, they're actually graduating with an AA degree. And so we don't know if the superintendent at the state is looking at some of these models and thinking that might be something that we can do for millions of students across the entire state. But if you could please just share with us the vision and kind of the things that you're working on, we'd appreciate that.
Great, thank you so much, Assemblymember Salas. I think I've earned the right to call him Rudy, though.
Yes, absolutely.
And President Christian, yes, you are all right. Be careful who you give your cell number to. I'm delighted to be here. I'm excited to pinch hit for the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. He says, oh, sorry, he was unable to be here, but I'm excited that I'm able to be here in his stead. The superintendent has a very ambitious set of goals. He is laser focused on closing the achievement gap, and not just in K-12, but in matriculating into post-secondary education. So we're talking about early college here and the transition from high school to college. Really, that gap starts before preschool. And so he's laser focused, along with the governor, Newsom, in really helping to support early learning and preschool for all in California. And so he actually, the superintendent actually convened 13 work groups, which 1,000 people from California participated in. And many of those work groups included early learning, professional development, increasing the teacher workforce, the jobs for the future that include STEAM education, college affordability, just to name a few, literacy. We know that you won't have the clients that we need if students don't know how to read by third grade, right? We know the research and that's clear. So he is super laser focused on closing the achievement gap and absolutely supports early college and dual enrollment. And he sees three main issues that we need to prepare for in order to scale it, statewide. And what you're doing here, what we've heard today, is amazing. And from his position, he has the opportunity and ability to not only advocate to the governor and to our other agencies, like Department of Finance, but he has like that bully pulpit, that spokesperson where he can share your best practices with the world. But in addition, we're incredibly value added. We have a lot of data, and I heard today that what you need, I'm looking at Naomi Donoso, you need longitudinal data. We're trying to get community college CSU, and you see the user student identifier. I don't know what the problem is, so that we can follow these students all the way through. But we have that data, and we need to do a better job of serving you, our clients, and we see you as our customers. And so whatever we can do to support that, we are in an administration, both of us, that actually support data. And think that data is important and data should inform what we do next. So the three main issues for early college we see is improving and increasing teacher and faculty workforce. We want our teachers to also be able to teach the students in courses that are dually enrolled for community college. We want to help them grow and support them. We also, facilities. One of the things that we're learning from the demonstration projects in Fresno is that we need the facilities and regionally, so students don't have to go very far. So we need to get really creative and innovative about the facilities and space and use and sharing of that space. And the third thing is the relationships. I mean, all that you've been able to accomplish here is due to you've had to. You've been on your own. We've neglected you, quite frankly, for many, many years. And so what you've done, what you've been able to do here to link not only your K-12 systems with higher ed systems and with nonprofits and with College Futures Foundation and folks like that and your business community is to be replicated. But that's because of building those trusting relationships where, as Lande mentioned, you're not siloed. You're having to blur the lines because you all have one common vision and one common message. So I just wanted to say that, we look through everything through an equity lens. He's incredibly supportive. We understand that graduation isn't the end goal, and it shouldn't be the end goal. We shouldn't congratulate ourselves if all students graduate, and of course we want all students to fill out the FAFSA, and so that's my PSA, or the California DREAM Act. But we need to do a better job of actual transitioning students to and through college, not only matriculating, getting the classes, but completing in a shorter amount of time, because we value the students. They're our most important, valuable human capital we have, and quite frankly, we've been wasting it and allowing it to just kind of go off. And what you've been able to do here is really capitalizing on that incredible value and that richness. So thank you.
Thank you for what you do. I can tell you that your heart and your passion for this over the last 20 plus years, I mean, definitely shines through. And having the opportunity to sit next to our superintendent now, Tony Thurman, who was actually my seatmate in the Capitol, I know he shares that same passion and drive that you do. So you two coming together to pair up, I think, is fabulous for the state of California and the things that are going to happen with our students. And you were talking about being data-driven, which a lot of people in this room, sometimes we bang our heads and just say, why can't they just look at the data and do things this way? Am I correct? Yes. Right? And so you also brought up like longitudinal data sharing, and how do we do that? And maybe Chancellor Oakley, you could talk about how that's happening between not just K through 12, but K through 14, K through 16, however we want to do it. So maybe talking about things like the program mapper. I don't know if that kind of can segue into what Ms. Lupita was talking about.
Sure. So, I always have to lean on my experiences coming through the system. And of course, I came from I spent a little bit of time in a community called Long Beach. And there we saw the incredible advantage of being able to share data amongst three public systems, the K-12 system, the community college system, and Cal State University Long Beach. And we did it by and large without the support of Sacramento. We did it because we felt it was the right thing to do. But it really benefited our ability to understand the student's journey from beginning to end. And I think that's really the importance. As Lande mentioned, students don't operate in the silos that we do. We are so institution-centric. If we designed our system of public education with the student in mind first, we'd look very different. And so that's what we need to do. We need to take this opportunity to take a step back and to actually intentionally redesign the way that we view the student journey. And what kind of data do we need to improve that student's journey? What kind of data do we need to improve our ability to support the student, to help us understand what the student is learning, to help us understand how effective we are as educators? Much of the time we spend pointing the finger at the student. Well, he or she is just not learning. When in fact, more than likely, it is us who is just not being effective at teaching, or not being effective at supporting. If a student shows up hungry, hasn't eaten for a couple of days, what do we expect that child to do when they get into the classroom? So having a data system that not only tracks a student's progress in their educational experience, but also, think about it. If a K-12 student is receiving support, for food insecurity in the high school, that information doesn't track into the community college or the CSU or the UC. So we lose that valuable data on that student's needs. And so having a data system that allows us to really understand the needs of the student, help us personalize the learning for that student, and then help us track their progress out of higher education into the workforce, and then be able to bring them back when they need to continuously upskill. I think that's the vision that we should have for our intersegmental data system. I think it's possible to get there. I think we have the commitment of the governor to get there, and I think we just have to be willing as institutions to give up, to leave our egos at the door, to stop pretending like we own the data in our institutions, and then be able to share the data across all the systems for the benefit of the student, not for the benefit of the institution.
Thank you. Definitely, when we're looking at students, we got to take this holistic approach, and I've heard it in each of your statements so far. We talk about equity, and we can talk about the issues that students face, and whether it's the longitudinal data that we're looking at. But I want to focus on, and maybe Lande, I can ask you this. The governor had come out earlier this year too and talked about the workforce and the future. And what does that really mean for students and for everyone here in attendance? What are we talking about? I mean, are we talking about artificial intelligence? Are jobs going to take over? How are we getting our students ready for this workforce commission? I know he put together a workforce commission. But maybe talk to us a little bit about that, because I know a lot of people maybe in the audience want to figure out how can they fit into what the commission's doing and what the governor's vision is and how we kind of move into the future.
Great. Well, just yesterday, I came from our third Future of Work Commission meeting, along with my colleagues, Julie Sue, who is the secretary of the Workforce Agency, Labor and Workforce, and Lenny Mendonça, who is our economic czar for the state. We're sponsoring this Commission on the Future of Work, and we've named 22 commissioners who are really helping us to think about what does that look like. Now, of course, people are focused both on the present as well as the future. And I think one of the first conclusions that we had is, in fact, the robots are not coming to eat our jobs. As is often talked about in the press, that the robots are coming. Yes, we have influences of technology and AI, and those are changing the nature of work. But generally speaking, jobs aren't going away, but specific tasks within jobs are going away. And what that means is that we're having a deepening of what we have seen as a trend over the last several years, which is a hollowing out of the middle in terms of jobs. We have the economy is producing a lot of jobs at the low end, a lot of jobs at the high end, relatively few jobs in the middle, and now with the increases in AI and robotics, we're going to see that even more dramatically. And so the question is, what does that mean in terms of our responsibility in government to make sure that Californians are prepared for that workforce that is coming, for the demand in jobs, and what does that look like? So we have been talking about what a social compact around work needs to be, what our unique role as government is, whether it is ensuring that we have resources to attend higher education, or ensuring that we have portable benefits for employees. But we're also recognizing, and you will find this as a theme through the administration, is we know that while we enjoy a position of great responsibility, that we can't do the work that we would like to do in the state of California alone. And so that commission has labor well represented. It has the business community well represented. It has a number of people who are thinkers around these issues of labor and workforce well represented. It has legislators, because we want to collectively come to some understanding around what does the future of work really hold for California, and what's our responsibility, what's the business community's responsibility, what's labor's responsibility. Yesterday, there was a mic drop moment when we had an economist from the St. Louis Fed come and say, I'm not actually sure that higher education is worth it the way in which it's currently being constructed. And the reason he said that is because the opportunity to go to college is not equitably distributed. And he said, unless you equitably distribute that opportunity, at the end of the day, you are exacerbating the kind of income inequality that we've already seen occur. And that when we think about the future of work, we're not just thinking about it because it's a nice thing to do. We're thinking about it because it has huge implications for income, but it also has significant implications for long-term wealth. And if we care fundamentally about poverty, we can't just be focused on how much you're making today. We have to be focused on the issue of wealth and what we're doing to make sure that we are generating wealth in the most disadvantaged communities. That's really, really hard to do. I saw a graph yesterday that showed that there are actually zero gains in wealth for African Americans with advanced degrees, which meant I made a very bad choice. Zero gains, zero, none. It's crazy. That's crazy. So we actually have to take really seriously the imperative to improve this state. And so that's what the Future of Work Commission is doing. I want to say that the K-16 collaborative that we're focusing on has that in mind, that there's nothing that we're doing that isn't thinking about the full cradle to career. And so as we think about that collaborative, we're looking at careers in healthcare, in business management, in education, in engineering. And if we are wildly successful, as we hope we will be, We'll be able to increase median salaries from $28,000 to $63,000 a year for the people who are in that collaborative. That we'll be able to increase four-year graduation rates from 22% to 60%. We'll be able to increase associate's degrees from 8% to 40%. Those are big numbers. That matters in the livelihoods of people. And so that's the work that we're really trying to do. And I just also want to say I made an oversight. When I think about that collaborative, not only does it include all those folks I talked about, it also includes our partners at the private institution, the private nonprofits, including Brandman and Fresno Pacific. So I just want to give them a shout out as well.
So Lupita, maybe you could talk about some of the things that we're doing with students or that the superintendent is doing. I know that some schools have like coding classes, for instance, and boot camps. And then maybe if you could just talk about, well, first we got to get them into this future. So how do we, each of you talked about equity, and how do we make school more affordable, and how do we address these needs? So if you could just talk to us a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Before returning to the Department of Education, I was the executive director of the California Student Aid Commission, and actually, Lande Ajose was my chair, and Commissioner Neese was also a commissioner when I was there, and so together we accomplished a lot of things. And one of the things, that we learned is that for like a decade we hadn't administered the student expenses and resources survey, so we didn't know really. We heard about food and housing insecurity, but we didn't know exactly their experiences because we're an incredibly generous state. We have $2 billion in Cal grants, which is the largest investment in state financial aid in the nation, along with the Pell grants. And if Eloy has anything to do with it, we'll get out of business soon with all the college promises he's been getting. So he's been incredibly successful at making sure that we think about the two-year student, the community college student, and the governor has responded in kind.
291.
So even with that, what Lande just described, housing and food insecurity is enormous. In fact, we just came from the college affordability summit in the Palm Desert. Some of you I see were also attended. And we had heard from a student panel, we actually heard a student say that she has fainted on a number of occasions because she's limited herself to one meal a day at about 4 o'clock. This is a real student that was on that panel. It was so disheartening because each of those students had a similar story about what they're doing to be successful in school. And so college affordability is not only a major passion of mine because I wouldn't have gotten through UCSD and Harvard without financial aid. Many of you, raise your hands, who got through college with financial aid? Right? Exactly. And so many of the students today, though, it's not enough to focus on tuition and fees. It's the cost of living that's almost more. And if we really truly want a student-centered system, you have to think about the student and what they need, regardless of where they are in the region, and regardless of the public institution they attend. And so what we've been doing is we've been providing financial aid amounts by prestige of institution and quantity. And we haven't been thinking about what the student needs and where they reside. So a community college student in Berkeley has the same need as a low-income community college student at UC Berkeley, and yet we fund them so differently. And that's inequitable right there. And up until recently, we say we care about career technical education, and yet we were funding them at about $500 a semester. And then we pushed it up to maybe 1,000, which is still not 1,800 of what a Cal grant for 2 semesters is worth, right? So we say that we only want to promote career technical education degrees, and yet we don't fund those students to be successful and complete those degrees. And so, State Superintendent is incredibly committed to college affordability, reforming our financial aid formula for all students, and ensuring that the lowest income students are provided the support they need. 55% of all 6.2 million students in California are low income, and we know, and you know, that in some districts it's 100%. We have 20% English learners. We know we speak over 100 languages in our state. And we know that we need to ensure that we're taking care of these students, that these students don't stop being poor, don't stop having mental illness when they graduate from high school. And so this link and this data is so critical and important. And so we will be putting forward, hopefully, a toolkit for students and parents to be able to take advantage of. There's a bill that was passed by Assemblymember Reyes 2015. I hope I got that right. Or someone will remind me I didn't. And it's required, starting in January, for all seniors to be provided information on how to fill out a FAFSA or a CADA. Because regardless of what you all do in this room to prepare students that are low income, if they don't actually fill out the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act, they're not going to college. And that's not an indicator anywhere. On the career and college readiness indicator, that's not a requirement. Some districts are making it a graduation requirement. Many of you we have like 1,200, 1,300 cash for colleges. Many of you are involved in those, Cal SOAPs, EAOPs, EOPs. Many of you are doing an enormous job in making sure students fill it out. But in spite of that, only 54% have filled out the FAFSA. And the other students aren't even eligible because they never filled it out, or the California DREAM Act. And so what do you think their reality is in going on to higher ed? So in spite of all these pathways, if they're not filling out the financial aid forms and no one's getting that help, they're not going to college. And so we're incredibly committed to ensuring that all students fill out the financial aid, but don't just fill out the financial aid, actually transition to higher education and not only matriculate, but complete within a timely manner.
Well, and if they're not filling the financial aid form, they're not getting the transfer entitlement either.
Nope.
When they go from community college to CSU or UC, which we have a whole nother problem with as well.
Yep. We need to fill out those forms, right?
Yes.
March
PSA.
2nd?
March 2nd,
By
yes.
March 2nd.
March 2nd. Right, I think that date has never
But it
changed.
opens October 2nd, so get all your kids to be filling it out right
That's
now.
it. Right, we all want the ability to help. At the state, we put in these big buckets, we invest billions of dollars into our students, but we need them to fill out the forms to have them to have a successful future. Real quick, let me ask one final question, and then we're going to go to questions of the audience, but I do want to sneak this in, so if you could just answer very quickly. How can everyone here in the room partner with what you're doing for the future, like the major pieces of the major things that you're working on right now? How can everyone here in the room, how can they be a part of that? What should they do? Where should they go to do that and to be a part of the vision that we have, not only at the community colleges, but the state superintendents and also for the governor? So let's just go right down the road.
So I'm a big believer in that you can't wait for Sacramento to get things going. You have to start here, start now, and take responsibility and accountability for every single student in this community. So, my job is to try to empower you to do the work, put pressure on me, put pressure on the Board of Governors, put pressure on the legislature to allow you the ability and the infrastructure to completely change and redesign the education system in Bakersfield, okay? That's what we need you to do, okay? I can whiteboard all day long what I think needs to happen in the state of California, but unless school boards, college district boards, superintendents, chancellors actually begin to enact that work on the ground, nothing will ever happen. So I would say, quit living in the silos that have been handed to you through the generations. Think about where your student is, try to design backwards from there, and just do what you think needs to be done and let Sacramento see that and react to that and try to make it easier for you to do that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think that in order to disrupt poverty, it's going to be very important for the state superintendent to be your advocate, to secure resources. I think also think about K-12 and higher ed, like Lande said, we need to blur the lines. The student can't see the complexity, put the complexity behind the green curtain. Allow them to have an experience through education and higher education that they don't even feel, that just go through the system and they're supported at every step of the way. And we're committed to supporting you in that. College affordability, I think, and living expenses and basic needs and mental health is critical. Number one issue students brought before the Student Aid Commission wasn't actually affording college, it was mental health. Mental health. And so if we don't address that, and if when we're stopping addressing that when they hit their graduation, when they walk across the stage, we're not getting them to complete. And so I think that we need to focus attention on mental health. We need to focus attention on ensuring that it's seamless and that transition is seamless and they provide the resources. We need to make it affordable. We can't waste a lot of time. We can't keep them captive for 8 years. We got to think about creative ways to get them in and through into a career. Looking at you, see here, and not just the next job. Thank you.
Lande.
I think, there are a couple things that we're going to be working on. We're going to be very, very committed to the issue of total cost of attendance. It is shameful that we have students who are fainting because they can't eat or who are sleeping in their cars. That certainly aren't the best ways to pursue your college degree. So we are going to be very focused on that. And we're also going to be focused on something that President Christian has already mentioned, which is we have just started a small group of folks who are working on a one-year initiative to look at how we set degree attainment goals for the state, right?
Yay!
And to do that in a way that is not just about a number, but in a way that really starts to pick up on the intricacies of where we have regions and places and people who are underserved. How do we think about goals for Latinx students? How do we think about goals across our higher education segments? But how do we think about goals by region, right? In addition to what we need as a state. So I know that, pivotal PPIC research calling for 1.1 million baccalaureates. When I was at California Competes, we said actually it's more complex than that because we also have needs at the associate's degree level. So it's actually 2.3 college credentials, right? Not just baccalaureate degrees, but also associate's degrees that we need to have in this state. So how do we start to think about that in ways that are nuanced and that aren't just about having a number out there, but that are about changing the lives and the livelihoods of people in various communities. I guess there's one other thing I want to say in terms of what you all can do, because I've heard kind of whispers of, why did Fresno get all the love? People are irritated. Why did you do stuff in Fresno? Why them? That was a decision that Governor Newsom made. And
Throw your boss under the bus. All right.
actually, it was candidate Oakley here who made that decision.
I would have brought it to Bakersfield.
Yeah, of course you did.
Yeah.
But I know that one of the contributing factors for why that decision was made is because that is a community, and I saw some of my colleagues from Fresno here today, that's a community where those leaders have been meeting in rooms together, not for months, not for a year, but for years. For years and years and years. And so what was clear was that that was a community of leaders who were willing to, someone said, get muddy together, right? They were willing to sit in the mud together to work through their difficult issues, to try and find ways to collaborate, to try and find ways to blur the lines. And I think it's that kind of leadership which is what we need. Because again, we can't do it all in Sacramento. It has to be you. So when we think about the DRIVE initiative and what you all can do, it is this kind of convening. It is taking this and deciding, what's the next step? It's great that we spent 6 hours together today. What are y'all gonna do tomorrow? What are you gonna do next week? Who's gonna lead that charge? What are your goals? What are the outcomes? How are you gonna get there? Come up with a plan. Be Elizabeth Warren. Right? You do all that, then you come to Sacramento and you make your ask. Because that's what happened, and that they came with a whopper of an ask, okay? But that's how that got done. It didn't come because we went out there and selected Fresno. It's because Fresno is demonstrating that they were gonna work together over time, and that's what we'd love to see in Kern County. We'd love to see that here in Bakersfield too. So, thank you.
All right, we just got our assignment, right, guys? Okay, with that, I'm just going to open it up. I know we have just a few moments for questions. And I believe Ms. Christian has a microphone over there. So if anybody has a question, we have a hand over here. So let's go ahead and begin probably right here in the front.
There's a microphone there as well. Leslie, you want to get it?
Leslie?
Over here.
All right, we have 2 questions here. Please.
Hi, Kathleen Ryland, CTE Dean at Cypress College. Thank you for the opportunity. One of the big things is I talk to employers all the time, and they really want people that have skills working. And our work study program got cut a little bit, and that's one of the best ways for us to do on-campus internships. I would encourage you to think about expanding the work study program so that we could use students in all capacities across the campus.
Hello. So my plea to everybody here,
You get to state your name and organization.
Jackie Cruz, Hartnell College, Salinas Valley.
Thank you.
So my plea to everyone is to put a plan together for rural California as far as higher ed, not just Bakersfield, not just Fresno, because then the other rural communities, and they all have the same kind of students that are amazing, talented, and in deep need. So we got to get our act together and put a collective plan that addresses everybody. Small voter towns, big voter towns, doesn't matter. It's not about the votes, it's about the students. That's what I'm...
All right. And perhaps not just the drive initiative in Fresno, but maybe all inland California, like the governor was talking about, or rural issues that a lot of our communities face. Please, additional question.
Thank you, Joanna Schilling, Cypress College. I'm so glad to hear you talking not only about the financial aid piece, but also about the hunger and housing insecurity. And so many of us here have really been focusing on food insecurity for a while. It's the housing crisis that's really becoming even more imperative that we address. And we're not equipped to do that. So one thing that I would like to ask, since you have the power and you're up there in Sacramento, and is one of the things that I have seen, we are working actively with our cities as they build affordable housing. They want to create partnerships with us to create opportunities for our students. We're working with our Assemblywoman, Sharon Quirk Silva in North Orange County. Here's the problem, is that we have all of these agencies working on homelessness, and very few are really focused on student homelessness. So we're kind of having to find a way to have a voice in that whole bigger discussion about housing. And as you know, there's money, but we're all so disconnected that talk about silos, right? It's not just education. So in order for us to really move forward on this, we absolutely need to be in the conversations that are happening at a larger level about chronic homelessness. And of course, our argument, and anytime anyone will let me talk, I'll talk about, we are trying to address the future of chronic homelessness. We are the wellness solution because we are educating. And if we don't do that, we are going to lose so many of those students who are trying to better their lives through education. So just a plea to please integrate some of these conversations so that we can address it with such a gigantic problem.
Let me allow, if any of the panelists would like to address any of the questions, or right now it seems like we're taking it all in, and I know I've worked with the Assemblywoman from Orange County talking about some of these issues, and each of you have brought up these issues in one way or another when we're talking about affordability and equity. We know that it's not just beyond what the Student Aid Commission is doing and making sure we cut a check to cover tuition, but covering all those additional expenses, which are barriers for our students.
If I could just say a few
Please.
words, and certainly, clearly, you're correct. There is a broad and large and stubborn problem with housing. It's causing ripples throughout every system of higher education, whether it's community college, the UC, CSU, and everybody in between. There are stories that abound, unfortunately, throughout all our systems. So, you know, we have to continue to push for long-term solutions, as you suggest. In the near term, we have to try to do everything possible to pull down every penny of aid that's due our students and to advocate for more. So many of our, and I'm just going to pick on our community colleges for now, but in many communities, the average pull down of Pell for eligible students is around 72%. We are leaving money on the table for our students that could be in their pocket being used to help them with housing. So we have to take advantage of every penny right now in the near term. So let's not forget what's available now. Continue to push with your cities, your counties, for every penny that's available now. And certainly we'll do everything we can to help you, but let's make sure that we are taking every dollar from the federal government that's due our students.
Absolutely.
One last question here.
Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ray Ramirez from Fresno City College. I'm the Interim Director of Student Equity and Success. I also serve on the Fresno Drive Initiative, one of the ad hoc subcommittees, the Race and Equity Committee. And there's been a lot of energetic conversation about the 1.1 million and energetic conversations about student success and equity, and even more energetic conversations about poverty. But I think the canary in the coal mine that's missing is racial equity. And so when we think about poverty, when we think about those 1.1 million baccalaureate degrees that are needed, and the number of students of color who come to community colleges, and the few who actually reach their educational goal across the state, I can't help but feel pressed to ask this question. One of the things that has helped us in Fresno over the past 2 years with the Fresno Drive Initiative is being intentional about embedding racial equity metrics into every goal. We know that racial outcome disparities plague not only education, but of course income and employment, health, housing, et cetera, right? And so my question is, in short then, what do you see the intersegmental collaboration possibilities of embedding racial equity goals into what we do from PK-12 to the UCs and beyond? Because I think if we aren't intentional and we find ways to embed racial equity goals into what we're talking about today, then we're really missing an opportunity for California and our community.
So I'll go ahead and go first. The good news is that certainly the two systems that I'm most involved with, community college and the UC, both are having real conversations about equity. We're in two different places, the UC and the community college. Obviously, community colleges, we live equity every single day that we walk onto a college campus. But those are real conversations happening. Those conversations include significantly improving the diversity of our faculty and staff. We have to talk about equity from all lenses, all angles. And so in the community college system, in the Vision for Success, equity is the major component of the Vision for Success. We don't feel that we can have any conversation about outcomes without first talking about equity. And to talk about equity in a real way means you're going to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations in your community. You can't talk about ethnicity and race in a community like Bakersfield without digging into the history of Bakersfield, without digging into the journeys that students in Bakersfield face, the systemic nature of discrimination that still presents itself. So we need to provide room for courageous leaders in every community to have these conversations and begin to unwind. And that's not going to be easy. That's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun, but it has to happen in order for us to move forward. So from my office, we're going to encourage that in our colleges. We're going to support that. And we're going to ask every college to have that conversation in order for us to move forward.
And I'll be brief. We've been shining the light on race and ethnicity and demographic information poverty for a long time. In fact, we have a mobile app on the California dashboard. What was surprising, and there's a lot of focus on, and you'll be alarmed to know, is that we've been putting a lot of emphasis on suspensions and expulsions and chronic absenteeism. So we recently found out through sunshining these lights and on our dashboard is that 2- and 3-year-old Black preschool babies are being expelled at ridiculous, rates. And so that equity and that gap starts in preschool, before preschool. So imagine that 2 and 3-year-old that starts getting expelled early on, and what do you think the trajectory is going to be? Okay, so we have laser focused our attention on those gaps. We're promoting building the workforce, a diversity workforce, males, African-American male teachers, because we know what research says about promoting and having them in the classroom, as well as other diversity. And I know that up until recently, even in the Valley, it's a little uncomfortable to talk about race because you're all very comfortable talking about low income, first generation, and diversity in general. But you're absolutely right. It's about race, and we have to laser focus what's happening to our Black and brown kids, Native American students. Chronic absenteeism is it triples for Native American students. And so we got to figure out why. We got to go to them. So very, very committed. State Superintendent Tony Thurman is very committed to that, and we've been loud and proud about it.
Thank you. Lande.
There's so many things I can say here. There's a couple things. One is, as we think about degree attainment goals for this state, there's no way to think about that and have an equity agenda if you aren't thinking about racial and ethnic gaps. It's just kind of a part of where it is. And so I think that we will be incredibly focused on that. And, you know, there was method to the madness, and there's method to the madness in terms of the focus on Central California because of what the population of Central California really looks like, right? So that is in some ways baked into our strategy. I think the other thing that I would say in terms of race and ethnicity and degree attainment is that we have been, this is probably Lande Ajose speaking more than Gavin Newsom, so forgive me, boss. But we have been in bunker mode in this state, frankly, since Prop 27 and Prop 2. Like, we don't want to talk about this stuff, and it affects how we have thought about what we can do in terms of admissions. And I believe, and I think there is some evidence, that we can do a lot better, even within the constraints within which we are living. And so if we really want to be serious about racial equity, we have got to look at our admissions practices. We've got to look at how we diversify our faculty and how we keep them. And we've got to, look at all of that with an eye towards, again, it is not just about getting people in to a college, but it is about getting them to and through and employed in high wage, high growth industries and dealing with the wealth gap that we face in this state.
So I guess change begins with us, and it begins with all of us in this room and being able to have what each of you guys talked about earlier, which is being honest with each other, being data-driven. And we're going to have to get muddy and talk about some of these issues to create this change. So with that, let's go ahead and give our panelists a big round of applause. Our Chancellor, Eloy Oakley, our Chief Deputy, Lupita Alcala, and our Senior Policy Advisor, Lande Ajose. So thank you very much for being here with us, for joining us here. Thank you.